They called her Riley when they bothered to call her anything at all. To most people at Fort Campbell's Officer Club, she was just another face behind the coffee counter. Someone who knew the difference between a cappuccino and a macchiato, but knew nothing about the weight of command decisions or the steel it took to carry them out. She moved through her shifts like background music, present but unnoticed, refilling cups and wiping down tables while colonels and majors discussed classified operations 3 feet away from her as if she were invisible. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Riley Martinez had been working at the Screaming Eagle Officers Club for 8 months. Her application had been processed through the usual civilian contractor channels, background check cleared, references verified. Former barista at a coffee shop in Nashville, the file said. Nothing remarkable. Nothing that would raise eyebrows or prompt second glances from security personnel who had more pressing concerns than a 28-year-old woman who made excellent espresso and never asked questions about the conversations she overheard. The Officers Club occupied the second floor of Building 1247, a nondescript brick structure that had been renovated twice since the 1980s. The main dining area featured dark wood paneling, framed photographs of airborne operations, and windows that looked out over the parade ground where fresh recruits learned to march in formation. It was a place where field-grade officers came to decompress after long days of planning missions that would send young soldiers into harm's way on the other side of the world. Riley's domain was the coffee station positioned near the back corner, strategically placed so that officers could grab their caffeine fix without interrupting the flow of conversation at the main tables. She had memorized everyone's preferences within her first 2 weeks. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes took his coffee black with exactly 2 sugars. Major Foster preferred a double shot of espresso with a splash of cream. Captain Williams, who looked like he hadn't slept in weeks, ordered whatever had the highest caffeine content and usually forgot to say please or thank you. The morning routine never varied much. Riley arrived at 0530 hours, 30 minutes before the club officially opened, to prep the machines and set up the breakfast service alongside Maria Santos, the head cook who had been feeding officers at Fort Campbell for 12 years. Maria was a talker, full of stories about her 3 daughters and opinions about everything from military politics to the weather. But she had learned early on that Riley preferred to work in comfortable silence, responding with nods and the occasional that kept the conversation flowing without requiring much participation. By 6 o'clock hours, the first wave of officers would begin filtering in. These were usually the early risers, the planners and staff officers who needed to review intelligence reports before the day's briefings began. They moved with the purposeful efficiency of people who had trained their entire careers to make the most of limited time, grabbing coffee and pastries before disappearing into conference rooms where they would spend hours staring at satellite imagery and troop deployment charts. Riley served them all with the same polite professionalism. "Good morning, sir," the usual, became her standard greeting, delivered with a smile that was genuine but not overly friendly, professional but not cold. She had learned to read the moods that came through her line, the tension that preceded a deployment announcement, the relief that followed a successful mission, the quiet grief that settled over the club when word came back that someone wouldn't be coming home. What none of them noticed was how Riley's hands never shook, even during the busiest morning rushes when orders backed up and officers grew impatient. They didn't see how her eyes tracked movement throughout the dining area, cataloging who sat where and with whom, noting changes in seating patterns that might indicate shifting alliances or new operational priorities. They certainly didn't notice the way she positioned herself at the coffee station, never with her back fully to the room, always maintaining clear sightlines to both entrances. The uniform she wore was standard civilian contractor attire: khaki slacks, white polo shirt with the Fort Campbell logo embroidered on the chest, comfortable black boots that met safety regulations but looked unremarkable to anyone who didn't know what to look for. The boots were her only concession to her past, broken in and comfortable in a way that suggested they had seen more than coffee service, but worn with enough civilian clothing that their military heritage wasn't immediately obvious.
Captain Rodriguez was probably the closest thing Riley had to a regular conversation partner among the officers. He was younger than most of the field-grade officers, recently promoted and still adjusting to the social dynamics of the officers' club. Unlike his more senior colleagues, he seemed to actually see the people who served him, remembering names and asking polite questions about how Riley's day was going. "You ever think about doing something else?" he had asked her one morning during a brief lull between the breakfast rush and the lunch prep. "I mean, you seem like you'd be good at, I don't know, something more challenging than this." Riley had smiled and shrugged, refilling the cream dispensers with practiced efficiency. "This suits me fine, Captain. Good benefits, steady hours. Sometimes simple is better." Rodriguez had nodded, seemingly satisfied with the answer, but something in his expression suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. There was an alertness to Riley that didn't quite match her job description, a way of carrying herself that spoke of training and discipline that went beyond learning to operate an espresso machine. The other civilian employees treated Riley with the casual friendliness of coworkers who shared shifts and break rooms but didn't socialize outside of work. She was reliable, competent, and refreshingly free of workplace trauma. She covered shifts when people called in sick, never complained about difficult customers, and had somehow managed to fix the temperamental espresso machine that had been acting up for months before her arrival.
"Girls got magic hands," Maria had declared after watching Riley coax the ancient machine back to life with nothing more than some basic cleaning and minor adjustments. "The machine hasn't worked this well since they installed it." What Maria didn't know was that Riley had spent 3 years maintaining equipment under considerably more challenging conditions, in places where mechanical failure could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. The espresso machine at Fort Campbell was practically luxury compared to some of the gear she had kept running in forward operating bases, where spare parts arrived by helicopter and repairs had to be completed under fire. The rhythm of the officers' club suited Riley in ways that her coworkers couldn't understand and that she couldn't explain without revealing more about herself than she was prepared to share. There was something comforting about the predictability of it, the clear hierarchies and understood protocols, even in a civilian setting. After years of constant vigilance and split-second decision-making, the simple act of making coffee and serving meals felt like a form of meditation, a way to quiet the part of her mind that never stopped analyzing threats and calculating contingencies. But on this particular Tuesday morning in October, as Riley went through her usual routine of setting up the coffee station and greeting the early customers, she had no way of knowing that her carefully constructed cover was about to be blown by something as simple as the way she tied her boots. The first sign that Tuesday morning would be different came at 0742 hours, when Major General Patricia Blackwood strode into the officers' club with the kind of urgency that made conversation stop mid-sentence. Blackwood commanded the 101st Airborne Division and rarely made appearances at the club during morning hours, preferring to take her coffee in her office while reviewing intelligence briefings that arrived throughout the night from various theaters of operation. Riley noticed the shift in atmosphere immediately. The usual relaxed chatter of officers discussing weekend plans and administrative matters died down as every person in the room registered the presence of their commanding general. Blackwood moved with the precise efficiency of someone accustomed to command. Her ACUs pressed to regulation perfection, silver stars gleaming on her collar tabs. She approached the main conference table where Lieutenant Colonel Hayes and Major Foster were already seated with tablets and classified folders spread between them. "Gentlemen," Blackwood said without preamble, "we have a situation developing in real time. I need your immediate assessment of our rapid deployment capabilities." Hayes straightened in his chair, his coffee forgotten. "Ma'am, are we looking at a standard deployment scenario or something requiring specialized assets?" "Specialized," Blackwood replied curtly. "The State Department received intelligence 47 minutes ago indicating an imminent threat to the embassy compound in Djibouti. Initial reports suggest coordinated attack preparations by multiple hostile factions. Ambassador Chen's security detail is requesting immediate extraction assistance for essential personnel." Foster pulled up a digital map on his tablet, fingers moving quickly across the screen.
Djibouti puts us at roughly 13 hours flight time with one refueling stop. If we're talking about embassy evacuation, we'll need helicopter assets for the final approach, plus ground security teams to establish and hold the landing zone. That's where our problem begins, Blackwood said, accepting a cup of black coffee from Riley without acknowledgement. Our primary rapid response helicopters are currently supporting Operation Iron Shield in eastern Syria. Secondary assets are undergoing scheduled maintenance. The nearest available rotary wing support is based in Germany, which adds another 6 hours to our response timeline. The weight of the situation settled over the table like a physical presence. Riley continued her morning routine, wiping down the counter and restocking supplies, but her attention was completely focused on the conversation unfolding 20 feet away. Embassy evacuations were time-critical operations that require precise coordination between multiple military branches, and any delay could result in American civilian casualties. Captain Rodriguez entered the club at that moment, immediately sensing the tension in the room. He approached the conference table cautiously, carrying a tablet loaded with what appeared to be fresh intelligence reports. "General, we just received an update from Langley. Satellite imagery shows vehicle convoys moving toward the embassy district from 3 different directions. The State Department is estimating we have less than 18 hours before the situation becomes untenable." Blackwood studied the information on Rodriguez's tablet, her expression growing more grave. "Show me the embassy compound layout and surrounding infrastructure." Rodriguez manipulated the display, bringing up detailed architectural plans of the American embassy in Djibouti. The compound occupied several acres in the diplomatic quarter in the city, surrounded by 12-foot walls topped with razor wire and monitored by an extensive security camera network. Under normal circumstances, the Marine Security Detachment could handle most threats, but the current intelligence suggested something far beyond their capabilities. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. "The compound has 2 potential landing zones," Rodriguez explained, highlighting areas on the map. "The primary LZ is the courtyard behind the main administrative building, but it's only large enough for 1 helicopter at a time. The secondary option is the parking area near the service entrance, but that requires approaching civilian neighborhoods where we'd be vulnerable to small arms fire." Hayes leaned forward, studying the tactical challenges. "What about the local military situation? Can we count on support from Djiboutian forces?" "Negative," Blackwood replied. "The political situation is too unstable. Government forces are dealing with their own security concerns, and we can't risk having our evacuation operation become entangled in local conflicts. This has to be a clean in-and-out operation using only American assets." Foster ran calculations on his tablet, cross-referencing aircraft availability with fuel requirements and crew rest regulations. "General, even if we could get helicopters from Germany airborne within the next 2 hours, we're still looking at a minimum 19-hour response time. That puts us well outside the window for a safe evacuation." The silence that followed was heavy with implications. Everyone at the table understood the mathematics of military operations, the cold calculus that determined whether missions succeeded or failed. In this case, the numbers weren't adding up to a favorable outcome. Major Sandra Williams approached the group, carrying a secure communications device that had apparently been chirping for attention. "Ma'am, we have the Secretary of Defense on secure video link. He's requesting an immediate briefing on our response timeline." Blackwood accepted the device and moved to a more private corner of the dining area, but her voice carried enough for the other officers to hear the frustration in her tone as she explained the logistical constraints they were facing. The conversation lasted less than 5 minutes before she returned to the table, her expression indicating that the pressure from Washington had just increased significantly. "The State Department is now reporting that the embassy compound is receiving probing attacks from small groups testing their perimeter defenses," she announced. "Ambassador Chen has activated lockdown protocols, but that's a temporary measure at best. We need to present viable evacuation options within the next 3 hours." Hayes pulled up air transportation schedules on his tablet, searching for any possibility they might have overlooked. What about commercial charter options? If we could get a small team to Djibouti using civilian aircraft, they could assess the situation and potentially coordinate with local resources. Considered and rejected, Blackwood replied. Commercial flights to Djibouti would still require military transport for the final approach to the embassy. And we're back to the same helicopter shortage. Plus, sending civilian contractors into an active combat zone violates about 12 different regulations. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with various officers proposing and discarding potential solutions. Each idea ran into the same fundamental problem: the lack of immediately available aircraft capable of performing the mission within the required time frame. Riley listened to the discussion while going through the motions of her regular duties, refilling coffee cups and clearing tables, but her mind was working through the tactical problems alongside the officers. She knew the geography of Djibouti from personal experience, understood the challenges of operating in that particular political and military environment. More importantly, she knew assets and capabilities that weren't reflected in the official databases these officers were consulting. But revealing that knowledge would require explanations she wasn't prepared to give, would mean exposing an identity she had worked carefully to conceal. At 0847 hours, Captain Michelle Torres burst through the club entrance carrying a tablet displaying real-time intelligence feeds. "General, we have visual confirmation of hostile forces positioning heavy weapons within range of the embassy compound. Looks like they're preparing for a coordinated assault, not just harassment or intimidation." The urgency in the room ratcheted up another level. What had been a potential threat requiring precautionary evacuation had just become an imminent attack scenario with American lives in immediate danger. Blackwood studied the intelligence imagery, noting the positions of weapons emplacements and vehicle-borne threats that suggested a sophisticated enemy with significant resources. "Time estimate until they're in position to commence their assault?" she asked. Torres consulted her tablet, correlating the visual intelligence with pattern analysis from previous similar operations. "Based on their current rate of movement and setup procedures, we're looking at 14 to 16 hours before they'll be ready to launch a full-scale attack." "Which still puts us outside our response window," Foster observed grimly. "Even if we had helicopters launching right now, we couldn't establish security and complete an evacuation before they're ready to light up the entire compound." The mathematical reality of the situation was becoming undeniable. American civilians were facing a coordinated assault by well-equipped hostile forces, and the most powerful military in the world lacked the immediate resources to mount an effective rescue operation. It was the kind of scenario that kept military planners awake at night, the convergence of timing and logistics that could turn routine diplomatic security into international tragedy.
Riley continued serving coffee and clearing tables, but she could feel the weight of knowledge pressing against her carefully maintained silence. She knew solutions existed that weren't appearing on any of the official channels these officers were consulting. The question was whether she was prepared to reveal who she really was in order to provide those solutions. As the morning progressed and the situation in Djibouti continued to deteriorate, that question was about to become unavoidable. Staff Sergeant Jake Mitchell entered the Officers Club at 0923 hours, moving with the controlled precision that marked him as someone accustomed to operating in environments where situational awareness meant the difference between life and death. Unlike the other personnel who had been filtering in and out all morning, Mitchell carried himself with a different kind of alertness, the hyper-vigilant posture of an operator who had spent years in places where complacency could be fatal. He was tall and lean, with the kind of weathered features that suggested extensive time in harsh climates, and when he approached the coffee station, his eyes automatically swept the room in a pattern that cataloged exits, cover positions, and potential threats. Most people wouldn't have noticed these subtle behavioral indicators, but Riley recognized them immediately because she had once moved through the world with exactly the same calculated awareness. "Coffee? Black. Mitchell said simply, his voice carrying the slight rasp of someone who had spent too many years breathing desert sand and cordite smoke. Whatever strongest. Riley poured from the dark roast pot, noting the way Mitchell positioned himself at the counter with his back to the wall and clear sight lines to both entrances. "Long night?" she asked, making the kind of small talk that was expected in her role. "Something like that," he replied, accepting the cup with a nod of thanks. His attention was already shifting to the intense discussion taking place at the main conference table, where the assembled officers were clearly dealing with a crisis that had everyone on edge. As Mitchell moved toward an empty table near the window, Riley noticed something that made her freeze for just a fraction of a second. There, visible for just an instant as his boot lifted to take a step, was a small fabric patch affixed to the heel of his combat boot. Most people would have dismissed it as random military insignia, but Riley recognized it immediately, the distinctive skull and crossed arrows design of 1st Special Forces Operational Detachment Delta, more commonly known as Delta Force. The patch was worn and faded, indicating years of operational use, and its placement on the boot heel was a subtle identifier used by operators to recognize each other without drawing attention from outsiders. It was the kind of detail that only someone with intimate knowledge of the special operations community would notice or understand. And seeing it triggered a cascade of memories that Riley had been working to suppress for the past 8 months. Mitchell settled into his chosen seat and immediately began assessing the crisis briefing taking place across the room. His posture and body language indicated he was following the conversation closely despite not being officially part of the discussion. And Riley could see the subtle signs of frustration that suggested he understood the tactical challenges being debated better than most of the officers involved. At that moment, Major General Blackwood's secure communications device chirped again, and she stepped away from the table to take another call from Washington. The conversation was brief but intense, and when she returned to the group, her expression had grown even more grave. "Situation update," she announced to the assembled officers. "Intelligence reports indicate the hostile forces have acquired shoulder-fired surface-to-air missiles. This changes our operational parameters significantly. Even if we had helicopters available, we'd be flying into a SAM threat environment without adequate suppression assets." The implications hit the room like a physical blow. Surface-to-air missiles turned what was already a challenging evacuation scenario into a potential suicide mission for any aircrew attempting to reach the embassy compound. Hayes rubbed his forehead, clearly calculating the expanded threat matrix in his head. "That eliminates rotary wing insertion entirely," Foster observed. "No pilot is going to fly into a hot LZ with manpads in the area, regardless of the mission priority." Captain Rodriguez pulled up threat assessment data on his tablet, cross-referencing known missile capabilities with potential engagement zones around the embassy. "Based on typical engagement envelopes for shoulder-fired systems, we'd need to establish a security perimeter at least 3 kilometers out from the compound before any aircraft could safely approach." "Which brings us back to the ground force requirement," Torres added. "We'd need boots on the ground to clear the missile threat before we could even think of helicopter evacuation." Blackwood studied the tactical problem from multiple angles, but each approach seemed to lead to the same conclusion. They lacked the immediate resources to mount an effective rescue operation within the available time frame. The mathematics of military logistics were working against them, and people were going to die because aircraft were in the wrong place at the wrong time. Mitchell had been listening to the discussion while slowly drinking his coffee, and Riley could see the tension building in his shoulders as the officers struggled with problems he clearly understood better than they did. Finally, he stood and approached the conference table with the deliberate movement of someone who had made a difficult decision. "Excuse me, General," he said, his voice carrying the respectful but confident tone of an NCO addressing senior officers. "Staff Sergeant Mitchell, I'm here for the Joint Operations Coordination briefing scheduled for 10 o'clock. Blackwood looked up from her tablet, clearly trying to place Mitchell within the context of the morning's scheduled meetings. "Mitchell, are you with the 160th SAR liaison?" "No, ma'am," Mitchell replied.
I'm assigned to a joint task force conducting training exercises with your rapid response elements, but I couldn't help overhearing your discussion about the Djibouti situation.
Hayes frowned, uncertain about the protocol for involving an NCO in strategic planning discussions. Sergeant, this is a classified briefing involving sensitive operational details. Mitchell's expression didn't change, but something in his posture suggested he was accustomed to dealing with classification levels that exceeded anything being discussed in this room. Understood, sir. But if you're looking at a time-critical evacuation scenario in East Africa with limited rotary wing assets, I might have some relevant experience. The officers exchanged glances, uncertain about how to proceed. Bringing an NCO into strategic planning discussions violated normal protocol, but the desperation of their situation was making previously unthinkable options seem reasonable. Riley watched this exchange from behind the coffee counter, recognizing the careful way Mitchell was positioning himself to offer assistance without revealing too much about his actual capabilities or unit assignment. It was exactly the kind of verbal maneuvering that special operations personnel used when working in environments where their true identity needed to remain concealed. "What kind of experience are we talking about, Sergeant?" Blackwood asked, her tone suggesting she was willing to consider any input that might help solve their problem. Mitchell stepped closer to the table, lowering his voice slightly. "I've been involved in similar evacuation operations in hostile environments. Time-critical scenarios where conventional assets weren't available or appropriate. There are alternative approaches that might not appear in standard planning documents." The phrase "alternative approaches" carried weight in military circles, particularly when spoken by someone with Mitchell's bearing and demeanor. It suggested knowledge of capabilities and resources that existed outside normal command structures, the kind of black budget assets that senior officers knew existed but rarely had direct access to. Foster leaned forward, clearly intrigued despite his initial skepticism. "Are you talking about special operations assets that might not be reflected in our current availability reports?" Mitchell's slight nod was barely perceptible, but it confirmed what everyone at the table was beginning to suspect. There are resources that could potentially be made available for a mission of this priority level, assets that specialize in exactly this type of scenario. Riley felt her pulse quicken as she listened to Mitchell carefully navigate the conversation. She could see he was walking a tightrope, trying to offer help without revealing classified information about Delta Force capabilities or current deployment status. It was exactly the kind of situation she had found herself in countless times during her own operational career. "What would you need to explore these possibilities?" Blackwood asked, clearly willing to pursue any avenue that might save American lives. Mitchell replied, "I can make no guarantees, but there might be options that haven't been considered yet." As the officers debated the wisdom of allowing an NCO to involve himself in crisis response planning, Riley made a decision that would change everything. She had been watching Mitchell carefully since he entered the club, noting not just the Delta Force patch on his boot, but also the subtle indicators that marked him as someone who operated at the highest levels of the special operations community. She stepped out from behind the coffee counter and approached the table with the same quiet confidence that had allowed her to blend into the background for 8 months. "Excuse me," she said softly, addressing the group but focusing primarily on Mitchell. "I couldn't help but notice you're looking for alternative solutions to the Djibouti situation." The officers turned toward her with expressions ranging from surprise to annoyance that a civilian contractor was interrupting their crisis planning session. Hayes was the first to speak, his tone politely dismissive. "Miss Martinez, this is a classified military briefing. We appreciate your coffee service, but this isn't really appropriate." Riley's eyes met Mitchell's for just a moment, and she saw the instant recognition there. He had noticed something about her that the others had missed, some subtle indicator that suggested she wasn't quite what she appeared to be. "I understand the sensitivity of the situation," Riley replied calmly. "But before you spend 30 minutes exploring alternative assets, you might want to consider resources that are already available right here." The room fell silent as the implications of her statement sank in. Blackwood studied Riley with new attention, clearly reassessing everything she thought she knew about the woman who had been serving coffee in her officers' club for the past 8 months.
Mitchell leaned back slightly in his chair, a knowing expression crossing his features. When he spoke, his voice carried a different quality, the tone of one professional addressing another. "Ma'am," he said, still looking at Riley, "I think we might need to have a different kind of conversation." Major General Blackwood's eyes narrowed as she studied Riley with the kind of tactical assessment she normally reserved for enemy positions. The woman standing beside their crisis planning table wasn't displaying the nervous energy or apologetic demeanor that civilian contractors typically show when accidentally inserted into military discussions. Instead, Riley maintained a calm, professional bearing that suggested familiarity with high-pressure operational environments.
"Miss Martinez," Blackwood said carefully, "perhaps you could clarify what you mean by resources that are already available." Riley glanced around the table, noting the mixture of skepticism and curiosity on the faces of the assembled officers. Only Mitchell seemed unsurprised by her intervention, his expression suggesting he had already begun to piece together clues that had escaped the others' attention. "I mean that while you're calculating response times from Germany and debating helicopter availability, you might be overlooking assets that could significantly alter your operational timeline," Riley replied. Her voice had shifted subtly, losing some of the deferential tone she had maintained for 8 months and taking on the crisp directness of someone accustomed to mission briefings. Hayes looked uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. "Ma'am, with all due respect, this is a classified operational planning session. Civilian contractors don't have access to military asset databases." "You're absolutely right, Lieutenant Colonel," Riley agreed. "Civilian contractors don't have that access, but I'm not exactly a civilian contractor." The statement hung in the air like an unexploded ordnance. Captain Rodriguez was the first to break the silence, his voice carrying a note of confusion. "What exactly are you saying, Riley?" Instead of answering directly, Riley reached into her pocket and withdrew what appeared to be a standard military identification card. She placed it on the table face up, and immediately every officer leaned forward to examine it more closely. The ID card was clearly authentic, featuring the sophisticated security elements and digital encryption that marked current military credentials. But instead of identifying Riley Martinez, civilian contractor, the card displayed a photograph of the same woman with different information. Captain Sarah R. Martinez, United States Army Special Operations Command. Foster was the first to speak, his voice barely above a whisper. "Special Operations Command? You're on active duty?" "Was," Riley corrected. Officially, Captain Martinez was killed in action 18 months ago during a classified operation in Syria. Unofficially, she was reassigned to a deep cover position for reasons that remain classified at levels above your current clearance. Blackwood picked up the ID card, examining the security features with the expertise of someone who had seen enough forged documents to recognize authentic ones. "This is legitimate," she concluded, "but it raises more questions than it answers." Mitchell leaned forward, his expression indicating he was beginning to understand the full scope of what they were dealing with. "Ma'am, if you're saying what I think you're saying, then we're not just talking about special operations background. We're talking about something significantly more specialized." Riley nodded slightly. "I spent 7 years with the 75th Ranger Regiment before being selected for assignment to a joint task force that officially doesn't exist. My specialty was rapid extraction operations in hostile environments, particularly scenarios involving time-critical evacuations under fire." The revelation hit the assembled officers like a seismic shock. They had been struggling with an impossible mission timeline while the solution had been serving them coffee for 8 months. Torres was the first to recover enough to ask the obvious question. "If you have that kind of background, why are you working in our officers' club?" "Because 18 months ago, my unit was compromised during an operation that went sideways in ways that are still classified. 3 operators were killed, including my partner. The decision was made to burn our identities and relocate surviving personnel to deep cover positions while the security breach was investigated." Hayes studied Riley's military ID again, noting details that confirmed her story.
Your rank shows captain, but if you're special operations with 7 years experience, that suggests rapid advancement through combat deployments. 4 tours in Afghanistan, 2 in Iraq, plus various other assignments that don't appear on official records. I made captain at 26, which is unusual but not unprecedented in special operations units where performance matters more than time and grade. Blackwood set the ID card down and fixed Riley with a direct stare. Assuming everything you're telling us is true, what exactly are you proposing regarding the Djibouti situation? Riley moved to the tactical display that Rodriguez had been using to show embassy compound layouts. With quick, confident movements, she began manipulating the interface to bring up additional layers of information that hadn't been visible in the previous briefings. The fundamental problem you're facing is that you're thinking about this as a conventional evacuation operation, she began. Large helicopters, multiple aircraft, establishing secure landing zones, but that approach requires time and resources you don't have. She zoomed in on the embassy compound, highlighting specific buildings and terrain features. What you need is a small team insertion using alternative methods. I know 3 different ways to get a 4-person extraction team into Djibouti within 8 hours, establish contact with embassy personnel, and coordinate a withdrawal that doesn't require helicopters landing in the compound.
Foster studied the tactical display with new understanding. You're talking about something more like a special reconnaissance mission than a conventional evacuation. Exactly, Riley confirmed. Small footprint, high mobility, using local resources and unconventional extraction methods, the kind of operation that Delta Force specializes in. Mitchell straightened at the mention of his unit, realizing that Riley had identified his true assignment despite his efforts to maintain operational security. How did you know? Riley pointed to his boot heel where the faded unit patch was visible. Same way you probably figured out I wasn't really a coffee server. People in our line of work develop certain habits and tells that are hard to hide from others who know what to look for. The admission created a moment of mutual recognition between 2 professionals who had operated in the same shadowy world of classified missions and compartmentalized operations. Blackwood watched this exchange with a growing understanding of the resources that had just become available to her. "Sergeant Mitchell," she said, "I'm beginning to suspect that your presence here this morning wasn't entirely coincidental." Mitchell's slight smile confirmed her suspicion. "Ma'am, my team has been monitoring the developing situation in Djibouti since the initial intelligence reports came in. We were prepared to make ourselves available if requested, but we weren't expecting to find additional qualified personnel already in position." Riley turned back to the tactical display, her movements becoming more animated as she shifted into operational planning mode. The key is understanding that embassy evacuations don't always require extracting everyone simultaneously. Priority personnel can be moved in small groups using methods that don't require large aircraft or secure landing zones. She began sketching approach routes on the digital map, showing paths that avoided the main threat areas identified in earlier intelligence reports. There are 3 potential extraction points within 2 kilometers of the embassy compound that could be reached by small boats or light aircraft. The trick is getting people from the compound to these locations without attracting attention from hostile forces. Torres leaned in to study Riley's proposed routes. These paths would require moving through urban areas that are potentially controlled by the same groups threatening the embassy. "That's where operational experience becomes crucial," Riley replied. "Moving through hostile urban terrain is exactly what special operations teams train for. It's not a conventional military operation. It's more like a covert infiltration mission." Hayes was beginning to see the possibilities, but he remained concerned about the risks involved. "Even if we could get personnel to these extraction points, we'd still need aircraft to actually remove them from the country." "That's where my contacts become relevant," Mitchell interjected. "There are assets positioned throughout East Africa that could support this type of operation, aircraft that don't appear on conventional military databases but are available for missions with appropriate priority levels." Blackwood was rapidly reassessing the entire operational framework. Are we talking about a completely off-books mission using resources that officially don't exist? Riley and Mitchell exchanged a look that conveyed years of experience with exactly that type of operation.
"Ma'am," Riley said, "sometimes the most effective solutions are the ones that never officially happened." The room fell silent as the officers contemplated the shift from conventional military planning to the realm of special operations, where rules were more flexible and success was measured differently. Captain Rodriguez was the first to voice what everyone was thinking. "If you two can actually pull this off, you'd be saving dozens of American lives that we've already written off as unreachable." Riley's expression grew serious as she considered the weight of that responsibility. The mission is definitely possible, but it would require complete operational autonomy and support from command levels that can authorize resources without creating paper trails. Blackwood stood and moved to the secure communication station. "I'm going to make some calls that are going to wake up people in Washington who don't like being woken up. If you two can develop a detailed operational plan in the next hour, I'll find a way to get you the authorization and resources you need." As the general began placing secure calls to contacts in the Pentagon and other agencies, Riley and Mitchell settled down at the tactical planning table. The coffee server and the visiting NCO had just revealed themselves to be two of the most qualified special operations personnel in the United States military. The real planning was about to begin. While Major General Blackwood worked her way through a series of increasingly classified phone calls, Riley and Mitchell transformed the Officers Club into an impromptu mission planning center. The tactical display that had been showing impossible conventional solutions now became a canvas for something far more sophisticated and dangerous. Riley's fingers moved across the interface with the fluid precision of someone who had planned dozens of similar operations. She overlaid multiple intelligence layers onto the Djibouti embassy compound: recent satellite imagery, communication intercepts, known terrorist cell locations, and something else that made Mitchell pause and study the screen more closely.
"Where did you get real-time human intelligence from inside the compound?" he asked, noting surveillance data that was updating in near real time. Riley's expression grew slightly guarded. "Part of my deep cover assignment involved maintaining certain unofficial channels. When you're officially dead but still breathing, you develop alternative information networks." She zoomed in on the embassy's internal layout, revealing details that went far beyond the architectural plans Rodriguez had been using earlier. This data showed guard rotations, communication protocols, safe room locations, and evacuation routes that had been developed specifically for scenarios like the current crisis. "You've been monitoring this location all along," Mitchell realized. "This isn't an emergency response, it's activation of existing contingency planning." Riley nodded slowly. Embassy compound security isn't just about the Marine Guards everyone can see. There are layers of protection that most people never know exist, including personnel who specialize in exactly this type of scenario. She brought up a new data stream that showed movement patterns around the embassy over the past 72 hours. The hostile forces that Torres had identified were indeed positioning for an assault, but Riley's data revealed something the official intelligence reports had missed. The attack was being coordinated with inside knowledge of embassy security protocols. "Someone on the inside is feeding information to the hostile forces," Mitchell observed, studying the attack timing and positioning data. "They know too much about internal security measures." "Which is why conventional evacuation methods won't work," Riley confirmed. "Any plan that follows standard protocols will be anticipated and countered. We need an approach that bypasses normal procedures entirely." At that moment, Captain Williams approached their table carrying a tablet loaded with fresh intelligence intercepts. "Martinez, or should I say Captain Martinez, we just picked up communications indicating the hostile forces are planning to commence their assault at 0300 local time tomorrow. That's moved up their timeline by 6 hours." Riley studied the new intelligence, cross-referencing attack timing with her own data sources. "They're accelerating because they know we're aware of their preparations. Someone told them about this morning's crisis briefing." The implications hit Mitchell immediately. "We have a leak inside Fort Campbell. Someone with access to operational discussions is communicating with hostile forces in Djibouti." Williams looked stunned. "That's impossible. Everyone in this room has the highest level of security clearances." "Security clearances don't prevent compromise," Riley replied grimly. "They just make the consequences more severe when it happens."
She began rapidly inputting commands into the tactical display, bringing up communication logs and personnel access records that shouldn't have been available through normal channels. Within minutes, she had identified 3 individuals who had accessed information about the Djibouti situation and subsequently made unauthorized communications outside normal military channels. "How are you accessing this data?" Williams demanded, clearly uncomfortable with the level of surveillance capability Riley was demonstrating. "Because for the past 18 months, my unofficial assignment has been hunting the same security breach that got my original unit killed. The Djibouti situation isn't random. It's part of a larger pattern of compromised operations that someone has been orchestrating from inside our own command structure." Mitchell studied the data Riley had compiled, noting connections between seemingly unrelated incidents over the past 2 years. Embassy threats in multiple locations, failed special operations missions, intelligence leaks that had resulted in American casualties. The pattern suggested systematic compromise at the highest levels. "You're saying this is all connected," he said. "The Syria operation that supposedly killed you, the current embassy threat, maybe other incidents we don't even know about? I'm saying someone has been using their position within the military command structure to sell operational intelligence to hostile forces, and they've been doing it long enough to develop a sophisticated network that spans multiple theaters of operation." At that moment, Major General Blackwood returned from her secure communications session, her expression indicating that her calls had produced both good news and complications. She carried a sealed folder that bore the distinctive markings of compartmentalized intelligence. "I have authorization for an off-books operation," she announced, "but it comes with conditions that make things more complicated. Washington is concerned about the security breach implications you've identified." She opened the folder and spread several documents across the table. "These are kill orders for 3 individuals who have been under surveillance for suspected intelligence compromise. The names match the ones you identified through your data analysis." Riley examined the kill orders, noting that they included detailed intelligence profiles and last known locations. 2 of the targets were currently stationed at military installations in Europe, but the third was much closer to home. "Major Cristina Valdez," she read aloud, "currently assigned to Joint Operations Planning at Fort Campbell." She looked up sharply. "She's been in and out of this building all morning." Mitchell's hand moved instinctively toward his concealed sidearm. "Are you saying we have a hostile operative working inside our own command structure?" "I'm saying we have a traitor who has been selling American lives for money," Riley replied. "And she knows about our current operation because she was monitoring the communications you used to get authorization for this mission." Blackwood's secure phone buzzed with an incoming priority message. She read it quickly, her expression growing more grim. Valdez just used her secure access to copy all files related to the Djibouti operation. She logged out of the system 4 minutes ago and left the building. The room erupted in controlled chaos as officers began coordinating immediate security responses. But Riley was already moving with the fluid efficiency of someone who had anticipated this development.
"She's not running," Riley said calmly. "She's activating a kill switch that will eliminate everyone who can connect her to the intelligence compromise. That includes the embassy personnel in Djibouti and everyone in this room who knows about the connection." Mitchell understood immediately. She's going to trigger the assault on the embassy ahead of schedule to eliminate witnesses, then arrange accidents for anyone here who can identify her as the source of the leaks. Riley was already pulling up building schematics on the tactical display, tracking Valdez's most likely movement patterns and escape routes. She has a 15-minute head start, but she's not leaving Fort Campbell. She's going to the communications center to send final instructions to her contacts in Djibouti. Then she'll try to eliminate key personnel here before extracting. "Starting with us," Mitchell observed. "Starting with us," Riley confirmed. She turned to Blackwood. "General, I need you to evacuate this building immediately and establish a secure perimeter. Valdez has access to weapons and explosives through her security clearance, and she has nothing left to lose." Blackwood was already coordinating with base security through her secure communications. "How do we stop her?" Riley and Mitchell exchanged a look that conveyed years of experience with exactly this type of situation. "We do what we trained for," Riley said simply. "We hunt her down before she can complete her mission."
She began rapidly downloading operational files to a secure tablet, preparing for a pursuit that would require all of her specialized training. The Djibouti evacuation becomes a secondary priority. If we don't stop Valdez in the next 20 minutes, she'll trigger an embassy assault that will kill everyone we're trying to save. Mitchell was already checking his equipment and preparing for immediate tactical action. Rules of engagement? Riley's expression hardened as she transformed from coffee server to special operations hunter. She's a hostile operative who has been responsible for American combat deaths. Rules of engagement are whatever it takes to stop her before she can activate her kill switch. The officers' club that had been a place of routine coffee service and casual conversation was now the command center for a counterintelligence operation that would determine whether dozens of Americans live or die in the next few hours. Outside the building, Major Christina Valdez was moving through Fort Campbell with the practiced efficiency of someone who had been planning this moment for months. She had resources, training, and a detailed escape plan that she believed would allow her to complete her mission and disappear forever. What she didn't know was that the woman she thought was a harmless coffee server had been hunting traitors like her for 18 months and was very good at her job. The real mission was about to begin, and it would be fought not in the deserts of Djibouti, but in the familiar corridors of America's most secure military installation. Riley moved through the corridors of Fort Campbell with the predatory focus of a hunter who had finally cornered her prey. 8 months of serving coffee and pretending to be invisible had led to this moment, and every step she took was calculated to intercept Major Christina Valdez before she could reach the base communications center. Mitchell flanked her position, moving through parallel corridors with the synchronized precision that marked two operators who understood each other's capabilities without needing verbal communication. Their earpieces crackled with updates from Major General Blackwood, who was coordinating base security from a secure location while monitoring Valdez's movement through the installation's surveillance network. "Target is approaching Building 4412, Blackwood's voice reported. She's carrying a tactical bag that wasn't present when she left the officers' club. Security is showing elevated readings on chemical detection sensors." Riley's jaw tightened. She's planning to destroy the communications center after she sends her final instructions. That bag contains enough explosives to level half the building and eliminate any evidence of her communications with Djibouti. They reached the intersection that would put them in position to intercept Valdez before she could enter the communications facility. Riley checked her sidearm, a weapon she had carried concealed throughout her months of deep cover assignment. The familiar weight of the pistol in her hands triggered muscle memory from dozens of similar operations. "Movement pattern suggests she's aware of surveillance," Mitchell observed, noting the tactical routes Valdez was using to approach her target. "She's trained for this type of evasion." "She should be," Riley replied grimly. "Major Valdez graduated from the same special operations training I did. She knows our tactics because she used to be one of us." The revelation added another layer of betrayal to an already complex situation. Valdez wasn't just a compromised officer selling intelligence for money. She was a special operations veteran who had turned her training against her own country and former comrades. Through their earpieces, they heard Captain Rodriguez's voice providing real-time intelligence updates. "We've confirmed communication intercepts between Valdez and contacts in Djibouti. She's been coordinating the embassy assault timeline to coincide with our crisis response planning. Every move we made this morning was anticipated." Riley processed this information while maintaining visual contact with the communications building. "She's been playing with us for months. The entire Djibouti situation was orchestrated to draw out anyone who might be investigating the intelligence leaks." "Including you," Mitchell realized. She knew there was someone hunting her network, so she created a crisis that would force you to reveal yourself. The tactical complexity of Valdez's plan was becoming clear. By threatening American lives in Djibouti, she had created a scenario where any undercover investigators would be forced to break cover to prevent casualties. It was a sophisticated trap designed to eliminate her pursuers while simultaneously completing her mission to compromise American operations. "Building 4412 visual contact," Riley reported, spotting Valdez approaching the communications facility with her explosive device. The major moved with the confident efficiency of someone who believed her plan was proceeding flawlessly. Valdez paused at the building entrance, scanning for security threats with the practiced vigilance of her special operations training. She was tall and athletic, with the kind of physical presence that commanded respect in military environments. Her tactical bag was positioned for quick access, suggesting she planned to deploy her explosives immediately after completing her communications. "She's activating her access credentials," Mitchell observed through his scope. 60 seconds until she's inside the facility. Riley made the tactical decision that would determine the outcome of the entire operation. Instead of attempting to intercept Valdez before she entered the building, she would allow her to access the communications equipment and begin her transmission to Djibouti. The risk was enormous, but it would provide the final evidence needed to identify all members of Valdez's intelligence network. "Let her make the call," Riley instructed. "We need to record her communications to identify her contacts and prevent future operations." Mitchell understood the logic but recognized the danger. If she completes that transmission, the embassy assault begins immediately. We'll have minutes to stop an attack on the other side of the world. "Then we better make sure those minutes count," Riley replied, moving into position to breach the communications facility as soon as Valdez initiated her transmission. Inside Building 4412, Valdez accessed the secure communications equipment with her legitimate military credentials. The irony of using official channels to betray her country wasn't lost on her, as she established encrypted contact with her handlers in Djibouti. "Phoenix Actual, this is Nightfall. Authorization Delta 77. Execute primary assault at 2100 local time. Repeat, execute primary assault at 2100 local time." The response came through immediately. "Nightfall. Phoenix Actual confirms. Primary assault commencing in 6 hours. What is the status of secondary objectives?" Valdez glanced at her tactical bag, confirming the timer settings on her explosive device. "Secondary objectives will be complete within 10 minutes. Facility destruction will eliminate all evidence of our communications." "Confirmed, Nightfall. Extraction assets are standing by at Rally Point Bravo. Phoenix Actual out." As Valdez ended her transmission and began preparing her explosives, Riley and Mitchell breached the building through secondary entrances. Their approach was silent and coordinated, using entry techniques refined through years of high-risk operations. Riley reached the communications room first, positioning herself to observe Valdez's final preparations. Through her earpiece, she heard Blackwood confirming that the entire conversation had been recorded and transmitted to counterintelligence teams who were already moving to intercept Valdez's network contacts. "Valdez," Riley called out, stepping into the communications room with her weapon drawn. "United States Army Criminal Investigation Command, you're under arrest for treason and conspiracy to commit murder." Valdez spun around, her hand moving toward the explosive device's detonator. Her expression showed surprise but not panic. She had contingency plans for exactly this scenario. "Captain Sarah Martinez," Valdez said with a cold smile, "I was wondering when the ghost would finally materialize. You've been very difficult to locate for someone who's supposed to be dead." "The reports of my death were greatly exaggerated," Riley replied, maintaining her weapon sight picture while calculating angles of fire that would prevent Valdez from triggering her explosives. Mitchell appeared at the room's secondary entrance, creating a crossfire that eliminated Valdez's tactical options. "Major, there's no extraction coming. Your network has been compromised and your contacts are already in custody." Valdez's confident expression faltered as she realized the scope of the operation that had been conducted against her. "Impossible. My communications were encrypted using protocols that can't be broken." "Your protocols were designed by the same people who designed mine," Riley explained. "When you turn traitor, you don't just betray your country. You betray everyone who taught you how to survive." The standoff lasted only seconds before Valdez made her final tactical error. Instead of surrendering, she lunged toward the explosive detonator, apparently willing to die rather than face prosecution for treason. Riley's response was instantaneous and lethal. 2 precisely placed shots ended Major Cristina Valdez's threat permanently, while Mitchell secured the explosive device before it could detonate. "Building secure," Riley reported through his earpiece. "Primary threat eliminated. Explosive device was neutralized." Blackwood's voice came through immediately. "Outstanding work. Counterintelligence teams have intercepted communications to Djibouti, canceling the embassy assault. All American personnel are safe." As security teams flooded the building to secure the scene and collect evidence, Riley and Mitchell emerged into the afternoon sunlight of Fort Campbell. The crisis that had begun with impossible evacuation timelines and compromised communications had been resolved not through conventional military operations, but through the specialized skills of 2 operators who understood the shadowy world of intelligence warfare.
"So what happens now?" Mitchell asked, noting the arrival of unmarked vehicles carrying personnel who clearly outranked everyone present. Riley looked toward the officers' club, where she had spent 8 months perfecting her cover as a harmless coffee server. "Now I go back to being officially dead while the real investigation begins." Valdez was just one node in a network that spans multiple countries and service branches. And the coffee service? Riley smiled for the first time since the crisis began. "I think they're going to need a new server, someone who's actually just good at making coffee." The woman who had been invisible for 8 months was about to disappear again, but this time by choice rather than necessity. The mission that had begun with serving coffee to unsuspecting officers had ended with saving American lives and exposing a treason network that could have compromised national security for years to come. Sometimes the most dangerous people were the ones no one bothered to notice. 3 weeks after the Valdez incident, the Fort Campbell Officers Club had returned to its normal rhythm of morning briefings and casual conversations. The coffee station still occupied the same corner position, but now it was staffed by Margaret Thompson, a genuine civilian contractor from Kentucky who actually had worked at coffee shops her entire career, and whose most classified knowledge involved the proper temperature for steaming milk. Major General Blackwood sat at her usual table reviewing intelligence reports when Captain Rodriguez approached with his morning espresso. The young officer had been unusually quiet since the revelations about Riley's true identity, struggling to reconcile the woman who had served him coffee with the special operations veteran who had neutralized a traitor in their midst. "General," Rodriguez said quietly, "I keep thinking about how completely we missed what was right in front of us. 8 months of daily interaction, and none of us suspected anything." Blackwood looked up from her tablet, considering the lessons that had emerged from their recent experience. "Captain, what you're describing is exactly what made her so effective. The best intelligence operatives aren't the ones who look dangerous. They're the ones who become invisible by being exactly what people expect to see." The investigation that had followed Valdez's death had revealed the staggering scope of the intelligence network she had coordinated. Financial records showed payments totaling over $3 million from foreign intelligence services in exchange for classified operational information. The betrayal had contributed to at least 7 failed missions over the past 2 years, resulting in the deaths of 16 American military personnel. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes joined their conversation, carrying the final report from the counterintelligence investigation. The network extended into contractor services, allied military units, and even some congressional staff members. If Captain Martinez hadn't exposed Valdez when she did, the compromise could have continued for years. "What's the current status of the remaining network members?" 14 individuals in custody across 6 countries, Hayes reported. 3 more under surveillance while investigations continue. The financial trail leads back to a coordinated effort involving multiple hostile intelligence services working together. Rodriguez shook his head in amazement. And all of this was uncovered because Staff Sergeant Mitchell noticed a unit patch on someone's boot? The conversation was interrupted by a man in civilian clothing who approached their table, with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to authority. He wore an expensive suit that didn't quite conceal the fact that he carried himself like a soldier, and when he spoke, his voice carried the unmistakable tone of classified briefings. "General Blackwood, I'm Deputy Director Collins from the Defense Intelligence Agency. I need to discuss some developments related to your recent counterintelligence operation."
Blackwood gestured for Collins to join them, noting the classified folder he carried and the secure communications device clipped to his belt. Deputy Director, I assume this concerns Captain Martinez? Among other things, Collins confirmed, settling into a chair and scanning the dining area to ensure their conversation wouldn't be overheard. The intelligence gathered from the Valdez network has provided us with unprecedented insight into foreign efforts to compromise American military operations. He opened his folder to reveal photographs and documents that carried classification markings Rodriguez had never seen before. Captain Martinez's 18-month deep cover operation has been one of the most successful counterintelligence missions in recent military history. The information she gathered will allow us to identify and neutralize similar networks in other locations. Hayes leaned forward with interest. Are you saying there are other operations like this one currently active? I'm saying that what happened here at Fort Campbell was a pilot program. Foreign intelligence services have been attempting to place assets inside American military installations for decades. Captain Martinez's success in identifying and eliminating this particular network has provided us with a template for detecting similar operations. Rodriguez was beginning to understand the broader implications. So, Riley, Captain Martinez, her assignment here wasn't just about hunting down Valdez specifically. She was developing methods for finding other traitors. Exactly, Collins confirmed, and based on the success of this operation, she's been reassigned to lead a new task force that will focus specifically on identifying and eliminating insider threats within the Department of Defense. Blackwood considered the security implications of what Collins was describing. Deputy Director, I have to ask about the risks involved in these types of operations. Having deep cover operatives working within our own installations creates its own security challenges. Collins nodded, acknowledging the complexity of the situation, which is why personnel like Captain Martinez are so valuable. She has the operational experience to function effectively in deep cover while maintaining the discipline and loyalty required for counterintelligence work. At that moment, Margaret Thompson approached their table with a fresh pot of coffee, her genuine smile and chatty demeanor providing a stark contrast to the intense secrecy of their conversation. Does anyone need a refill? I just brewed a fresh pot of the Colombian blend. The officers accepted her service with polite thanks, but the interaction served as a reminder of how much their perception of the coffee station had changed. What had once been background service provided by an invisible civilian contractor was now understood to be a critical position that required careful security screening and constant vigilance.
After Margaret returned to her duties, Collins continued his briefing. The Valdez Network's communications revealed that foreign intelligence services specifically target support positions like food service, maintenance, and administrative roles because they provide access to classified information without attracting security attention. How do we protect against that kind of infiltration? Hayes asked. By understanding that every person with access to classified facilities is a potential security risk, Collins explained. Background investigations need to be more thorough, security monitoring needs to be more comprehensive, and personnel in positions like food service need to receive counterintelligence awareness training. Rodriguez was still grappling with the personal implications of their recent experience. Deputy Director, what about Captain Martinez? Will we see her again, or does she disappear back into whatever classified world she came from? Collins's expression suggested the answer was complicated. Captain Martinez's official status remains classified, but I can tell you that her service to this country continues in ways that most people will never know about. The work she does requires a level of sacrifice and dedication that few people understand. He closed his folder and prepared to leave, but paused to address one final concern. General Blackwood, I want to emphasize that the security breach you experienced here was not a failure of your command. Foreign intelligence services invest years in developing these types of operations. The fact that you had an asset in place capable of detecting and neutralizing the threat demonstrates the effectiveness of our counterintelligence measures. After Collins departed, the three officers sat in contemplative silence, processing the implications of what they had learned. The casual environment of the officers' club had been revealed as a potential battleground in an intelligence war that most military personnel never realized was being fought. It changes how you look at everything, Rodriguez observed.
Every person who serves our food, maintains our equipment, or processes our paperwork could potentially be gathering intelligence for foreign governments. Or could be one of our own people working to protect us from exactly that kind of threat, Blackwood added. The challenge is that we can't tell the difference just by looking. Hayes gathered his materials and prepared to return to his duties, but the conversation had clearly affected his perspective on military security. I suppose the lesson is that we can't take anything for granted. Even something as simple as coffee service might be more complex than it appears. As the officers dispersed to their various responsibilities, the Fort Campbell Officers Club returned to its normal operations. Margaret Thompson continued serving coffee and clearing tables with the cheerful efficiency of someone who genuinely enjoyed her work. The conversations around her focused on routine military matters, training schedules, equipment maintenance, and administrative concerns. But now, every officer who entered the club carried a different awareness of their environment. They understood that the person serving their coffee might be exactly what they appeared to be, or might be something else entirely. They had learned that in the world of military intelligence, the most dangerous threats often came from the most unexpected sources. Somewhere in the world, Captain Sarah Martinez was beginning a new assignment that would take her to another military installation where she would assume another identity and begin the patient work of identifying threats that other people couldn't see. Her official records would show her as killed in action, while her actual service continued in the shadows, where the most important battles were fought by people whose names would never appear in history books. The coffee would still get served, the missions would still get planned, and American military personnel would continue their service around the world. But now they understood that their protection came not just from the weapons they carried and the training they received, but from the invisible guardians who work among them watching for threats that could destroy them from within. 6 months later, the ripple effects of the Fort Campbell operation had transformed counterintelligence protocols across the entire Department of Defense. Colonel James Patterson, the new commanding officer of the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, reviewed classified briefings that detailed similar operations at 17 other military installations worldwide. The patterns were disturbing and consistent. Foreign intelligence services had systematically infiltrated American military facilities by placing operatives in positions that provided access without attracting scrutiny. Food service workers, maintenance technicians, administrative clerks, and even base chaplains had been compromised in what appeared to be a coordinated, multi-year effort to undermine American military capabilities. Patterson's secure tablet displayed a global map showing confirmed infiltration attempts, successful penetrations, and ongoing investigations. The scope of the operation dwarfed anything military intelligence had previously imagined. "This isn't espionage," he muttered to his aide, Captain Jennifer Walsh. "This is systematic warfare conducted through civilian employment channels." The Fort Campbell incident had become a case study taught at the Defense Intelligence College, where future counterintelligence officers learned to identify the subtle indicators that Riley Martinez had recognized in Major Valdez's behavior. Her techniques for maintaining deep cover while conducting active investigations had been incorporated into training curricula that would prepare the next generation of covert operatives. Meanwhile, at a classified facility in Langley, Virginia, Riley herself stood before a wall of monitors displaying real-time intelligence from operations around the world. Her new assignment as Director of Domestic Threat Assessment put her in charge of a task force that combined the resources of multiple intelligence agencies in an unprecedented effort to identify and neutralize insider threats. The team she commanded included former Special Operations personnel, experienced counterintelligence agents, and technical specialists who could monitor communications and financial transactions with surgical precision. Their mission was simple in concept but staggering in complexity. Identify every foreign operative working within American military and intelligence facilities. "Status report on Operation Coffee Break," Riley requested from her operations coordinator, a former Navy SEAL named Commander David Chen who had transitioned to intelligence work after a career in direct action missions. Chen pulled up data streams from 12 different military installations where operatives similar to Riley were conducting long-term surveillance missions. Assets are in place at Fort Bragg, Norfolk Naval Base, Peterson Air Force Base, and 9 other locations. Each operative has established cover identities in support positions and begun mapping communication patterns within their assigned facilities.
The code name Operation Coffee Break had been chosen deliberately, both as a reference to Riley's successful mission at Fort Campbell and as a reminder that the most effective intelligence operations often appeared mundane to outside observers. The operatives deployed under this program were among the most skilled covert personnel in American intelligence, each capable of maintaining their cover identity for years while gathering intelligence on potential security threats. Riley studied the progress reports from each location, noting the different approaches required for various types of military installations. Naval facilities presented unique challenges due to the transient nature of ship deployments and crew rotations. Air Force bases required different skill sets because of the technical complexity of aircraft maintenance and the tight-knit nature of aviation communities. Army installations like Fort Campbell offered the most opportunities for long-term infiltration but also carried the highest risks of exposure. Any indication that foreign intelligence services are aware of our increased counterintelligence activities? Riley asked. Mixed signals, Chen replied, bringing up communication intercepts from known hostile intelligence networks. Some chatter suggests they're experiencing difficulties maintaining contact with assets, but we're not seeing wholesale operational changes that would indicate they know the full scope of what we're doing. The success of counterintelligence operations often depended on maintaining the illusion that business continued as usual while systematically dismantling enemy networks from within. If foreign intelligence services realized the extent of American efforts to identify their operatives, they would likely activate sleeper agents and extract compromised personnel before they could be captured and interrogated. Riley's tablet chimed with an incoming priority message from Deputy Director Collins. The encrypted communication contained intelligence that made her pause and call for an immediate secure conference with her senior staff. "We have a development that changes our operational priorities," she announced as her team assembled in the facility's secure briefing room. "Intelligence sources indicate that the network we dismantled at Fort Campbell was just the operational arm of a much larger infrastructure." She activated the room's tactical display, showing a complex web of financial transactions, communication links, and personnel movements that spanned multiple continents. "What we're looking at is evidence of a coordinated effort by multiple foreign intelligence services to establish what amounts to a parallel intelligence network operating within American military facilities." Commander Chen studied the data with the analytical eye of someone who had spent years tracking enemy movements in combat zones. "Ma'am, this looks like the kind of infrastructure you'd build if you were planning for a significant escalation in hostilities. These aren't just intelligence-gathering operations, they're positioning assets for active sabotage." Riley nodded grimly, which means our timeline for identifying and neutralizing these networks just became much more compressed. We're not just hunting spies anymore, we're preventing what could be coordinated attacks on American military capabilities. The briefing continued for over an hour as the team analyzed intelligence indicating that foreign operatives had been specifically targeting military installations that housed critical capabilities, special operations units, advanced aircraft development programs, nuclear weapons storage facilities, and strategic communication centers. The pattern suggested preparation for a coordinated operation that could cripple American military responses during a crisis, leaving the country vulnerable to conventional military action by hostile nations. It was the kind of strategic threat that military planners had theorized about but never expected to encounter in reality. "Recommendations for operational adjustments?" Riley asked her team. Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Kim, a former Air Force intelligence officer who specialized in technical surveillance, raised her hand. "Ma'am, we need to accelerate our timeline for all active operations. If these networks are preparing for activation, we have weeks rather than months to identify and neutralize them." "Agreed," Riley replied. "What about expanding our operational scope?" Chen consulted his tablet before responding.
We currently have assets deployed at 12 locations, but intelligence indicates potential infiltration at over 40 military installations worldwide. We need to triple our operational capacity just to address the immediate threat. Riley considered the resource requirements for such an expansion. Training and deploying undercover operatives required months of preparation under normal circumstances, but the developing threat might not allow for standard timelines. Draft a proposal for emergency deployment protocols, she instructed. I want options for getting qualified personnel into cover positions at priority targets within 2 weeks. As her team dispersed to work on expanded operational planning, Riley remained in the briefing room to review classified files that detailed the full scope of the threat they were facing. The intelligence painted a picture of coordinated espionage that had been developing for over a decade, with foreign operatives systematically infiltrating not just military facilities, but also defense contractors, research institutions, and government agencies. The woman who had once served coffee at Fort Campbell while hunting a single traitor now found herself responsible for countering what amounts to an undeclared war being fought through employment applications and security clearances. The stakes had evolved from preventing individual intelligence leaks to protecting the fundamental security infrastructure that kept America safe. Her secure phone buzzed with an incoming call from Major General Blackwood, who was now serving as the Pentagon's liaison for domestic counterintelligence operations. Riley, I hope you're sitting down. We just received intelligence that changes everything we thought we knew about this threat. Go ahead, General, Riley replied, preparing for whatever revelation would further complicate their already complex mission. The Valdez network wasn't just selling intelligence to foreign governments, Blackwood continued. They were also providing detailed assessments of our counterintelligence capabilities, including information about operations like yours. Which means every foreign intelligence service involved in this conspiracy knows exactly how we identify and neutralize their operatives. The implications hit Riley like a physical blow. If enemy intelligence services understood American counterintelligence methods, they could develop countermeasures that would make future operations significantly more dangerous and potentially ineffective. How do we proceed when the enemy knows our playbook? Riley asked. We write a new one, Blackwood replied, and this time we make sure only the right people know what's in it. In the end, Riley Martinez had taught them the most important lesson of all, that the people who keep you safe are often the ones you never notice, and that sometimes the person serving your coffee might be the one saving your life. But now she faced an even greater challenge, protecting a nation from enemies who had learned to use America's own openness and trust against it, while developing new methods of detection that could stay ahead of adversaries who seemed to anticipate every move. The coffee would still get served, but the war for America's security would be fought in ways that no one had imagined possible. 2 years after the Fort Campbell revelation, the landscape of military security had been fundamentally transformed. At Peterson Space Force Base in Colorado, Technical Sergeant Maria Santos worked the night shift in the Satellite Communications Center, monitoring deep space tracking systems that protected American interests beyond Earth's atmosphere. What her colleagues didn't know was that Maria Santos was actually Captain Elena Rodriguez, one of Riley's most successful deep cover operatives, who had spent 14 months identifying a network of compromised personnel with access to classified space defense systems. The evolution of threats had forced American intelligence agencies to develop increasingly sophisticated countermeasures. Foreign operatives were no longer content with simply gathering intelligence. They were actively attempting to plant malicious code in critical defense systems, sabotage equipment during routine maintenance, and establish backdoor access to communication networks that could be exploited during future conflicts. Captain Rodriguez's mission at Peterson had uncovered a particularly insidious operation where maintenance contractors employed by a defense corporation had been systematically installing hardware modifications in satellite communication equipment. These modifications appeared to be routine upgrades, but actually created vulnerabilities that could allow foreign intelligence services to intercept or disrupt communications between American military units deployed worldwide. The complexity of modern espionage required operatives like Rodriguez to possess not only traditional intelligence skills, but also advanced technical knowledge of computer systems, encryption protocols, and electronic warfare capabilities. The days when counterintelligence work involved simply following suspects and monitoring their communications had given way to a new era where the battlefield existed in cyberspace and the weapons were lines of code rather than bullets. Meanwhile, at Naval Air Station Oceana in Virginia, Petty Officer Second Class Marcus Johnson had been working in the aircraft maintenance bay for 18 months, establishing himself as a reliable and skilled technician who could troubleshoot complex avionics systems. In reality, Johnson was Lieutenant Commander Alex Thompson, a former Navy pilot who had transitioned to intelligence work after sustaining injuries that ended his flying career. Thompson's investigation had revealed that foreign intelligence operatives were targeting maintenance personnel with access to advanced fighter aircraft, attempting to gather technical specifications that could be used to develop countermeasures against American air superiority. The operation was so sophisticated that it involved creating fake technical manuals with subtle errors that would degrade aircraft performance over time, potentially causing catastrophic failures during combat operations. The psychological toll of deep cover operations had become a significant concern for Riley's organization. Operatives like Rodriguez and Thompson spent years living false identities, maintaining relationships built on deception, and constantly suppressing their true personalities to avoid detection. The mental health systems developed for these personnel represented a new frontier in military medicine, addressing trauma that came not from combat exposure, but from the isolation and stress of prolonged deception. Dr. Amanda Reeves, the chief psychologist for Riley's task force, had developed therapeutic protocols specifically designed for deep cover operatives returning from extended assignments. The challenge we face is that traditional PTSD treatments don't address the unique psychological pressures of living a false identity for years, she explained. During a classified briefing at the Langley facility, these operatives experience a form of identity displacement that can persist long after their missions conclude. They've trained themselves to suppress their authentic personalities so completely that some struggle to reconnect with who they really are once their cover identities are no longer needed. Riley herself had experienced these psychological challenges during her transition from coffee server back to intelligence director. The habits of deference and invisibility that had made her so effective undercover required conscious effort to overcome when she resumed her leadership role. She had learned to view these psychological adaptations not as weaknesses, but as evidence of the profound dedication required for successful intelligence work. The global scope of the threat had necessitated unprecedented cooperation between American intelligence agencies and allied nations. Riley now participated in classified briefings with counterparts from British MI6, Israeli Mossad, Canadian Security Intelligence Service, and Australian Secret Intelligence Service, sharing techniques and coordinating operations against intelligence networks that span multiple continents.
These international partnerships had revealed that the conspiracy uncovered at Fort Campbell was part of a larger strategic initiative by hostile nations to undermine the military capabilities of democratic allies worldwide. Similar infiltration operations had been discovered at military installations in the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, and other NATO member countries, suggesting a coordinated effort to prepare for large-scale conflict. The financial resources supporting these operations were staggering. Intelligence estimates suggested that hostile foreign governments had invested over $2 billion over the past decade in developing and maintaining their infiltration networks. This investment included not only payments to operatives and handlers, but also sophisticated training facilities, advanced communication equipment, and elaborate cover identity creation services. Riley's task force had developed new investigative techniques that combined traditional human intelligence methods with advanced data analytics and artificial intelligence systems. Computer algorithms could now identify subtle patterns in personnel behavior, financial transactions, and communication habits that might indicate foreign intelligence activity.
However, these technological advances also created new vulnerabilities as hostile intelligence services worked to develop countermeasures that could defeat American detection systems. The cat-and-mouse game between American counterintelligence and foreign espionage operations had become increasingly complex and dangerous. Each success in identifying enemy operatives led to improved enemy tradecraft, requiring constant innovation in detection methods and operational security. One of the most significant developments had been the creation of deliberately false intelligence designed to identify compromised personnel. Riley's organization had begun feeding carefully crafted misinformation through different channels within military installations, then monitoring to see which false intelligence appeared in foreign intelligence reports. This technique, known as canary trapping, had successfully identified several previously unknown operatives, but also required extreme care to ensure that the false information couldn't be used to harm American interests. The ethical implications of counterintelligence work had become a subject of intense debate within intelligence circles. Operations that required American personnel to maintain false identities for years, potentially deceiving colleagues and friends, raised questions about the psychological and moral costs of national security work. Riley had established an ethics review board that evaluated proposed operations to ensure they met strict standards for necessity and proportionality. "We have to remember that we're fighting to preserve democratic values," she explained to her senior staff. "If our methods compromise those values, we risk becoming indistinguishable from our enemies." The success of Operation Coffee Break had led to the development of even more ambitious counterintelligence programs. Operation Silent Partner placed undercover operatives in defense contractor facilities where they could monitor for industrial espionage. Operation Hidden Guardian focused on protecting research institutions developing advanced military technologies. Operation False Dawn created elaborate deception operations designed to mislead foreign intelligence services about American military capabilities. Each program required years of planning and enormous resources, but the alternative, allowing foreign intelligence networks to operate unopposed, could result in the compromise of military operations that would cost American lives and potentially alter the balance of global power. The transformation of Riley Martinez from a coffee server to one of America's most important intelligence officials had become a symbol of the hidden war being fought to protect democratic societies. Her story was taught at intelligence training facilities around the world, not just as an example of successful tradecraft, but as a reminder that the most effective intelligence operatives were often those who could become completely invisible while maintaining their core mission focus. As Riley stood in her office at Langley, looking out at the Virginia countryside where she had once served coffee to unsuspecting officers, she reflected on how much had changed and how much remained constant. The threats had evolved, the techniques had become more sophisticated, and the stakes had grown higher. But the fundamental challenge remained the same: identifying and neutralizing those who would use America's openness and trust as weapons against the very freedoms they were designed to protect. The next generation of intelligence operatives was already in training, learning not just traditional espionage skills, but also advanced technical capabilities, psychological resilience techniques, and ethical frameworks that would guide them through the moral complexities of their chosen profession. They would face threats that Riley's generation could barely imagine, armed with tools and techniques that would have seemed like science fiction just a few years earlier. But regardless of how technology advanced or threats evolved, the core mission remained unchanged. Ordinary people doing extraordinary things to protect their country, often at great personal cost and usually without recognition or acclaim. In the end, Riley Martinez had learned that the most important battles for national security weren't fought on distant battlefields, but in the everyday interactions between people who trusted each other enough to share coffee and conversation, never knowing that among them walked both those who would betray that trust and those who would die to protect it.
Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen.
If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.